Hello, this is Mr. Mesher, and today I'd like to do an analysis of the Robert Hayden poem, Those Winter Sundays. This is a rather short poem. Robert Hayden, he was an African American poet. He was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1913, and he died in 1980. He was a professor at Michigan State University, and later he was a consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress. Much of his inspiration stemmed from his study of American and African American life, and a lot of his poems were based off of his lifetime. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue sack cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? And as you see, this is a pretty short poem, but the meaning in it is very powerful, and he gets this out with every single word. To start off, let's look at the first stanza here we have, where he talks about how his father got up and started this fire. And he says, Sundays too, my father got up early. Analyzing this very first line, we know that the character's father didn't just get up early on Sundays. He was getting up early every day. Just compare or consider the environment that the father puts himself in, but the character has no association with. This doesn't sound like a great life that the father gets to live before his son is even awake. Puts his clothes on in the blue back cold, and then he has cracked hands and they ached from labor in the weekday weather. But he still got up and he made these fires blaze. And we should also note the very last sentence of this stanza says, no one ever thanked him. If we go a little lower here, in the very last stanza, the last sentence says, what did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? When you think of this poem, perhaps it comes by as almost a eulogy or an ode to the father's love, but certainly this is a poem looking back on the past. It sounds like perhaps the character in the poem has a bit of a regret for how he treated his father. No one never thanked him. What did I know? This poem seems like a lament. Perhaps the father in this poem has passed away. When we go into the second stanza, which is one of the two short ones in the middle, he says, I'd wake and hear the winter cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call. We can already see the imagery that the author, Mr. Hayden, creates in this poem. The cold is splintering, it's breaking. It doesn't just evaporate instantly. It's not just gone out of thin air. It's first splintering and then it's breaking. It's a gradual increase in temperature, and the father makes sure not to call the son until the rooms were warm, as it says. The father has a lot of love for his son. He wants his son to be comfortable. He doesn't want him to wake up and be cold. But the son says here in the next stanza, slowly I would rise and dress. He says slowly here. He says in the next stanza, speaking indifferently. And then he also mentions how his father had driven out the cold and he polished his good shoes. His father had a really just a loving vision for his son. He wanted to make sure that everything was ready to go when his son got up. He just got out of bed and his shoes are already polished. The house is warm. We can tell that the character in this poem is not extremely affluent, but his father makes sure that there are no misdeeds going on in his son's life. No shortcomings for him despite their circumstances. What do you all think about this poem? When I read it, I think about my own parents. I think of how hard many of the people in my life, including my parents, grandparents, even supervisors at work, they've worked tirelessly to ensure that I have the keys that I need to succeed. And nobody polished my good shoes anymore, there were people in my life who made a sacrifice so that I could live a less stressful life. When we read this poem, the several indications of a sense of loss that Robert Hayden has put into this. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? He also says no one ever thanked him. Perhaps maybe this poem can serve as a reminder to us to remember to genuinely thank the people who try to make our lives easier, because as this poem shows, we don't even know some of the steps that people take to ensure that we have what we need to succeed.